listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello, and welcome to this June 4th edition of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Let's go to John Williams to see who we have as a guest today.
Welcome to today's episode of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards, where we dive into the fascinating life of Donna Leigh Scott, someone whose extraordinary life story is worthy of telling. She has worn many hats and lived through many incredible experiences. After graduating from the University of Arizona, our guest moved to Southern California, initially working in the entertainment industry before becoming a producer. She worked with stars like Raquel Welch and Anne Margaret, and even had a stint as an actor and model. In an unexpected twist, she won a beauty pageant she was never supposed to win. She also graced the Dean Martin Show as a singer-slash-dancer to fund her education in court reporting, a field where she would later specialize in high-profile cases, including the infamous Michael Jackson trial. Her travels have taken her across the globe. She's also performed country and western music, and so many more interesting experiences. Currently, she manages Robert Redford's social media and fan mail, while enjoying life with her daughter and grandchildren. At 78 years young, she continues to find joy in her faith, her family, and her rich tapestry of life experiences. Join us as we explore her incredible journey, filled with resilience, creativity, and a touch of humor.
Thank you, John, for that awesome introduction. Donna Leigh Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I want to start by having you tell us about your 5-minute reign as a beauty contestant winner. Can you tell us all about that?
Yes. At the time, I was an actor, and my agent called and said, "Would you want to be in a beauty pageant?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well," he said, "it's for girls between 18 and 23 who've never been married, and there's chaperones and everything." I said, "I'm 28, I've got a kid, I'm married. Why would I do this?" And he said, "Because you won't win. Don't worry about it. We just need fillers. We don't have enough girls. So could you just go and, you'll get paid?" And I said, all right. Oh, and he says, "And you'll get to meet Howard Hawks, who's one of the judges." Now, Hawks is one of the all-time great directors. He directed Red River, all the Humphrey Bogart, Lauren Bacall movies. He was just, so this was a big thing for me. So I said, all right. So I went, and somehow, don't ask me how, I won. And I wasn't supposed to win. And nobody told anybody who I really was and what my age was and everything. So they had to disqualify me after it was already announced. But anyway, what it did was they wanted to use me to do all the publicity stunts with this actor named Jorge Rivero. I think he was in a movie called Rio Bravo that was directed by Howard Hawks. And so they had me do all of these shots, these publicity photos and everything. But anyway, Hawks got in touch with me, and he asked me to come to Palm Springs and meet with him on a project he had. And he liked the buddy movies like Butch Cassidy, and he wanted to make one. And he was pretty old then. He was somewhere in his 80s. And he said, it's going to star Clint Eastwood and Steve McQueen, and you will be introduced as the love interest. He said, you're going to play a Russian spy, but you're really going to be Flo from Jersey. So you have to have this accent. Excuse me. And then you have to switch over to Jersey. I said, I can do that. So anyway, he started grooming me for this part, and he let me write my own dialogue. So we were writing on this script, and I was going down to Palm Springs about every weekend working with him on this script. And I honestly didn't think it would ever get done because he was just getting so old, but he had such great stories to tell. Just to sit there and listen to him talk about Truman Capote or Howard Hughes, or, it was just so interesting. But anyway, as it turns, and then he wanted me to meet, oh gosh, now I can't remember the director's name. Anyway, he was real. This director was real hot on Sybil Shepherd, and he didn't like Sybil Shepherd. He wanted me to meet him, and he was a famous director. Now my mind is blank. But anyway, he died, and he fell over his dog, and he lived there by himself, and evidently he lay there for a while, and then when they found him, it was too late, and then he died. So that was the end of that. But he was going to make me, he said, he discovered Angie Dickinson, and I was going to be his last discovery. So, but honestly, I really didn't expect that to happen.
You've lived an interesting life, and you don't even seem to realize it. How come you haven't written a book yet?
The truth of the matter is, it's only been this year that I've retired. And I mean, a year ago from today or yesterday, I was working a 13-hour day. So I've worked a lot. Robert Redford and I have talked about writing a book for him. But he didn't want to do that. And I said, what about a book of essays? I said, you've got a lot of great stories. And he says, well, you've got a lot of great stories. And he said, I'll do it if you help me and if you edit it. And I said, okay, but so far we haven't done that. But it gave me the idea of, because people on Facebook are saying, I make funny stories up about my life. And they'll say, why don't you write a book? This is so funny. Why don't you write a book? And I thought, well, maybe I will if I get the time. Well, now I have the time. But honestly, I don't know that I'm a pretty good writer, but to write a book is intimidating to me. And I'm only reminded of things when somebody reminds me. Something will come up in Facebook of something that happened 10 years ago, or I wrote about something and then, I remember that. I should write these things down. I'm thinking about it. I have friends who've written books and they've self-published, and it's not that hard to do, I guess. So I am thinking about it, but you think, who's going to want to read this? But I have so many people that say, I would. It's so funny. So the problem is you have to be interesting, and in my case, you have to be funny as well. Otherwise, it's probably not that interesting. But I may do it.
Well, some of the stories I've seen you post online are pretty great, and I'm sure people would love to read about them. So tell the audience about your late husband, Tim Scott, and how the audience would know him.
He was an actor, a character actor. His biggest achievement was Lonesome Dove. And whenever I come to Texas, there are people that are such major Lonesome Dove fans. They can even recite pieces of the movie and the script. And I used to go to spend a lot of time in Jefferson, Texas, in East Texas. And the people there knew who I was. They knew I was Tim Scott's wife, and they'd want to meet with me and talk about Lonesome Dove. And but also he started out with Butch Cassidy, which is how I met Robert Redford. So Butch Cassidy, Lonesome Dove, Electric Horseman, which is the movie that we were married on. I was brought in to play Robert Redford's ex-wife, and the casting director really wanted me, but and they didn't know that I was with Tim. I was dating him then. He was one of the first people cast in Electric Horseman, but they didn't know who I was. But anyway, I lost out to Valerie Perrine because she had just come out of Slaughterhouse-5, and they decided to go with her instead of some unknown person. But anyway, I was there on that set. And then Fried Green Tomatoes is another one that people know him from, and then Footloose. And there's like 30 years body of work on television. Ned Blessing, a series. Down Home was a series called Wild Times with Sam Elliott and Ben Johnson. But he's mostly a Western actor, and he looks different all the time. So he's not somebody you readily recognized. Oh, I know that guy, but it was a great career for him. But basically, he's really well known for Lonesome Dove. And when he died, we took his ashes to Bill Whitliff, who was the producer of Lonesome Dove. We took his ashes to his ranch where they filmed part of it. And there's a pond there, and we put a bench there. And then Sam Shepard, who's another actor, wrote a poem, and we buried it in front of that bench and put a plaque on there. So he's basically, there on Bill Whitliff's ranch. And it's funny because after we buried his ashes, and people said things, different actors and people came and said things. And we're walking back to the house, and it was night, and there was this huge meteor that went across the sky, and it was like huge. It was so big that people were talking about it in Ohio. And so and Tim loved falling stars, and we used to chase meteors and everything. So, we all stopped, and everyone said, "Oh my God, there goes Tim!" So that was the main thing that people remember about him as Lonesome Dove.
Which character did he play in that series?
He played Pea Eye Parker, and basically he was the sidekick of Robert Duvall and Tommy Lee Jones, and he played kind of a slow guy. And the most memorable thing, and the film clip that we showed at his memorial in Los Angeles, was a buffalo run where he and Duvall were coming up over this rise, and Duvall says, how come you're not married? How come you don't, and it's just kind of a back and forth. It's kind of a funny dialogue. And then all of a sudden they reach the top of the rise, and then here comes all of these buffalo and Indians, and they're chasing them. And then they take off riding, and then they do the guy, Tim and Duvall riding off in their horses. It's in slow motion, and there's music over it and everything. It's really quite dramatic, but Duvall got hit in the leg with an arrow, and so that is one of the most memorable scenes in there. But he did the first Lonesome Dove, and then he did Return to Lonesome Dove. Now, the rest of the cast didn't go with it, but he went ahead and did it. And then they were going to do The Streets of Laredo, which would have starred him. And at that point, he had gotten sick, and he had lung cancer. And they said, they put the filming off for almost a year, waiting for him to see if he could get better so that he could do the Pea Eye character in Streets of Laredo. Turns out he wasn't going to make it, so Sam Shepard said that he would take it over. So he and Sam talked on the phone a lot, and Sam, I could tell he watched all of the Lonesome Dove series, and because he had his mannerisms down and everything. And right after he died, Streets of Laredo came out with Sam in it. So that's why Sam wrote that poem, I think, for Tim, because they became very close working on that part.
Didn't you and Tim get married during one of his films with Willie Nelson in attendance?
Yeah, with on Electric Horseman. So Tim and Willie would prank each other, just like Newman and Redford would prank each other with these outrageous jokes that they would pull on each other. Like, I can't even tell you. But so one day, the day that we got married, afterwards we went to a Willie Nelson concert. He had a concert that night, and so when we came back and went to our hotel, there was this big arrangement of flowers. It was in the shape of a horseshoe, and it was really ornate. And Tim said, "Oh, honey, look, Willie sent us flowers." I said, "Tim, that's a funeral wreath." So he was punking him on that. One time he sent Tim a watch. It was all wrapped up in this beautiful, you'd think it was a Rolex and everything. And they used to make fun of actors who looked in the mirror all the time. So because they were both, rugged looking, guys that looked like their picture should be up in the post office. So he opened it up expecting this great gift. It was a watch that Willie took the inside out and put a mirror on. He says, now you can just pretend like you're looking at your watch, but you could just be gazing at your face. And then, just they would do stuff like that.
Tim Scott is also in the Cowboy Hall of Fame. What does that mean to you?
Oh, yes. Yes, he is. He was inducted the year before he got sick. And in fact, when I look back on those pictures, I can tell by looking at them that he did look sick. But one of the reasons it is so meaningful to both of us is because he started out his career. There was a movie called Macon County Line, and in it, he and James Gammon, who's another great character actor, he was an urban cowboy, and Max Baer, who you remember from Beverly Hillbillies. And I think Max Baer even directed Macon County Line. But anyway, Tim played a rapist, and it bothered him so much. He felt so horrible playing that part that afterwards he said, I'm never, ever going to play a rapist or a bad guy again. He said, I can't do it. He said, I just want to do Westerns. So he started doing Westerns. And there was a series called Wild Times. And Tim played Sam Elliott's sidekick, and they were the two stars of it. And Ben Johnson was in it too, if you remember Ben Johnson. He was a wonderful actor, a wonderful guy. Also, Richard Farnsworth was a really good friend who was another fantastic actor who was a stuntman, and he became an actor. Wilford Brimley, who was, you remember from the diabetic commercials or whatever. Anyway, he was another good friend that was also an Electric Horseman. Yeah. Anyway, it meant a lot to him that he was inducted into the Cowboy Hall of Fame for that body of work and not for something like Macon County Line. And it just was such an honor, and I keep that statue that they gave me, and it's gone. It was actually for the series called Ned Blessing, and I don't know why they chose that because he had such a large body of work, and especially Lonesome Dove. But anyway, so that's why it was so important.
Okay, I want to come back around to you now. Before your recent retirement, you were a court reporter for 48 years after earning money for school for being a singer and a dancer on the Dean Martin Show. Dean Martin happens to be one of my favorite performers from the Rat Pack, so I'm interested in hearing all about him. Can you tell us those stories?
Yeah. He was something else, and I had met him when I was about 19 because I worked for a producer who produced a movie called How to Save a Marriage and Ruin Your Life, and he starred in that. And so I met him, and he was very nice, very professional, never saw him drink. And then the next year, I met his double, and he took me to a party at his house. And so I knew him then. I was 19 or 20. And he was always such a gentleman. He was so professional. He was a real family man. And when I went to go do to audition for the Dean Martin Show, it was the last season. So it was about 1974. And I was real nervous because you had to be able to sing and dance. And I thought, well, I can't do either of that, but I can fake it, I'd had some voice lessons and I'd had some dance lessons, but I was primarily an actor. So I go to the audition, and there's like 1,000 girls there, and they're only going to choose like 20, right? So I walk in, and I think, oh, I can't do this. So I turn around and walk out. I go and sit in my car. I talk to God. And I said, okay, what should I do? I really need this job, but I don't think I can do it. And he said, give it a try. I said, okay, but you got to help me. And he said, okay. So I go back in, and the first thing you have to do is sing. And I had some sheet music. I think it was a Beatles song. I don't even remember what it was, but there's a piano player. And so they start playing, and I start singing. And after you they do about 5 girls at a time, and then they'll say, you, and you stay, and you can go. So I stayed. I passed the first round. Wow, thank you, Jesus. Okay, so then the second round was dance. So then they had a choreographer take like 5 girls and teach us a routine. So we learned the routine, and we did the dance and everything, and they said, okay, you stay. So I stayed again. And I was the only actor there. They were all professional singers and dancers. So I think we did a skit or something. So I aced that. So I was hired. And we would do things like, we had this running skit where I would be in the bar, and he would come in, saunter into the bar, and I'd be by myself, and he'd walk up and he'd start singing. He'd say, fairy tales can come true. It can happen to you if you're young at heart. And I'd turn around and say, I don't go out with fairies, and then stand up and walk out. So we had a thing going like that. Or I would, one time on a show, Loretta Lynn was there, and I got to sing backup with her. On a particular song, or they'd have me sit on a bale of hay with my hair in pigtails and a little gingham dress, and Tom T. Hall would sing me a song or something. So it was great. It wasn't hard, and he was such a gentleman. He wouldn't rehearse. So they have doubles, and the director rehearse you. And then when it's time to shoot and cameras are rolling, he'd walk in, he'd do his stuff, and then he'd walk out. I never saw him hit on anybody. I never saw him flirt with anybody. I never saw him drink. He was almost standoffish in a little way, but he was extremely professional. Very, very nice guy, and a real family man. You could tell that he adored his wife. So I did that last season. And then next came the roast, the celebrity roast. So I segued into that, and all they had me do was basically sit in the audience. I remember sitting next to the Playboy guy. What's his name?
Hugh Hefner.
The guy on Hugh Hefner, sitting next to Hugh Hefner with his Barbie person on the other side. They would sit you next to whatever celebrity they wanted to put the camera on. We were just fillers. Like when you go to the Academy Awards, they'll have in the front what's called fillers, people all dressed up. And then when the celebrities get up to go to the bar or something, that you have to go in and sit down there so it looks like people are there. But anyway, so that's what that was. And I made enough money to pay for court reporting school. And that was the objective. That's what I wanted to do. So I needed to have a backup career.
And you did that for 48 years.
Yes.
So what's the most memorable case you witnessed?
Well, basically, yeah, because I did depositions. I very rarely did court, but probably the most famous one, I did some high profile, but the most famous one was the Michael Jackson child molest, the first one. And I took his deposition and the boy's deposition, the boy's mother's deposition. And so that was really, really interesting. And I had known Michael Jackson before because he lived across the street from my friend. My best friend at the time was Meredith McRae. If you remember her from Petticoat Junction, you're probably too young to remember Petticoat Junction. But anyway, her father was Gordon McRae and mother was Sheila McRae. Anyway, so he lived across the street from her. So we would go over there sometimes when he was young. And then I had a friend who, and my sister went, when we worked at the William Morris office, which is an agency, he would come in when he was a little kid and be in her office, and she'd babysit him. So I kind of knew him. So it was interesting to me, but it was also kind of sad because I knew him kind of since he was really young. But that was probably the most interesting one.
Okay, so one of your passions is traveling. Tell us about some of the best trips you've ever taken.
Oh my gosh, probably the best trip I ever did was Africa. And I was there for like 3 weeks, and we were hiking and camping out. We didn't we didn't stay in a lodge except when they had to go get supplies. So then we'd stay in a lodge, but we were camping out all the time, and it was just like 5 women. And so, and luckily one was a doctor, because I got really sick in the very beginning. You had to be really careful about drinking the water. And so I got really sick, and she was there to help me. But anyway, we had these Maasai warriors that were with us, and that were, hiking with us and stuff. That was so interesting. I can't even tell you. They taught me how to do snuff. It's like, I don't smoke. I don't do any drugs or anything. But they're sitting there doing snuff. And I said, what are you doing? And they said, you want to try it? And I said, oh, sure. I'm so dumb. I don't even know what they're doing. So they taught me. They said, here, put this on here and just sniff it. So I said, okay. So I did. And somebody was taking pictures, and you can see my head just go, whoa, just like almost go off my neck. And it was like sniffing cayenne pepper or something. But anyway, they hiked with us. It was, they laughed. They thought that was funny. But then there's a picture of one guy. He felt sorry for me, and he put a little flower in my hair. I could send you those pictures. But anyway, but they hiked with us, and they told us how they used these branch things to clean their teeth, and their teeth were absolutely gorgeous white. They took us places where no white people went. And so we would go in, sit in these people's huts and have tea with them and meet the elders and the children. It was so interesting. The little kids would run up to me and say, do you know George Bush? And I thought, how do they know who George Bush is? But they did. I said, well, no. And a little kid would come up, and he wants to be your guide, and he would take you, if we were in marketplaces and stuff, and he'd negotiate for me for stuff. And you paid for things with like baseball caps, pens, stuff like that. But the people were so kind and so wonderful, and the warriors. I had, to hike Africa with Maasai warriors, and we did a hot air balloon ride over the Mara. It was absolutely spectacular, and we were like watching lions. Not far away from them. One thing that happened that was really scary. We had this like Jeep where you can stand up and I was taking pictures of an elephant that was across the road. And all of a sudden, what we didn't realize was that her baby was on the other side of the car, and she started to charge us in this, and I'm standing up in this thing, and all of a sudden you see the camera going every which way, and I'm falling down because the van had to take off really fast to get out of the way, because she was going to charge this Jeep that we were in. That would have been disaster. But it was great. It was truly great. I spent 3 weeks there, and we camped out and told stories, and they had great food. They had a cook that would make this great, it was American stuff, I don't know, steaks and stuff, but they would have to go and get more supplies and stuff. But it was probably the most interesting and fascinating trip I've ever done. And the birds that are there are different than any. Yeah, I mean, we had to walk across like muddy waters things to get across. We had to wade across, and they said, oh, by the way, there's crocodiles in there. Oh my gosh. And also, when you're camping out in this tent, whatever you do, if it gets hot, don't put your head outside, because hyenas will come and they'll just eat you. And so it was not safe. So it wasn't one of those cushy tourist things where you glamp in the tent and it's, it was like just a tent with a cot, and the guy would come every day and bring us water and stuff. But when I was really sick, and I think I had a fever, I was going in and out of consciousness, there was a guy, one of the African guys he would stand over me and look at me, and I was brand new. I didn't know him or anything, and he would just tend to me. He was so wonderful. It was a really fabulous trip.
Is that the same trip you had when you had the crash landing in the hot air balloon?
No, No, that was a different one. When we landed on the Mara, they had a big breakfast for us, laid out and everything. The crash landing was in the Loire Valley in France. So my friend and I, we had wanted to go on a hot air balloon, but we couldn't get in. So we took off on a train to Venice. And while we were in Venice, they said, "Oh, we got room. You got to come back to Paris right now." So we jumped on a train and went back, and then went right to the thing. And the hot air balloon operator was a woman. She looked like Sigourney Weaver. And so it was just me and my friend and one other woman, a French woman that didn't speak English or something. Anyway, we go and we're sailing along, and it was just beautiful. And all of a sudden, a thunderstorm comes up, and there's lightning, and she says, "Oh my God, we got to land. And she said, "Hold on, because we're going to crash land. We're going to have to land in this cornfield, and it's going to be really rough. And if you don't hold on, you'll get killed." So because the basket tilts to the side, and there's a handle, and you have to hold on to the handle, but you're laying on your back. And if you were to let go of your handle, you would go flying out, and you'd probably break your neck. So anyway, we landed in this cornfield, and we're sitting there, and we're in the middle of nowhere, we think. And the balloon operator, she says, "I'm going to go try to find the chase car that's going to be trying to look for us." So she took off, and we're sitting there, and she said, "Every once in a while, pull this thing so that the fire goes up so somebody can see us." So we did that. Here comes these beautiful white horses, and I thought, oh my gosh, if I didn't know better, I think I was dead and in heaven or something. And then here comes these people, and they didn't speak English, but they had a little farmhouse, and evidently we were on their property. So they invited us to their house, and they opened champagne for us and everything. And we didn't speak French, and they didn't speak English, but somehow we were able to communicate. And then finally the chase vehicle came. They found us. And but that was a big adventure. And since then, I've decided maybe I won't do any more hot air balloon rides.
You've got some great stories, but let's bring it back around to home for you.
Okay.
Tell us about your missions work at your church and the little deal that you worked out with God.
Yeah, well, when my father was dying, there was a woman that sat with him, and he was in Tucson and I was in California, and I couldn't be with him all the time. I did go, but when I came, I had to leave and come back. And she sat with him, and she would put the phone up to his ear and let me talk to him, and she would tell me how he was and everything. And I thought, that is really something worthwhile. So in my church, which was a Lutheran church, there's a Stephen ministry, which is basically where we do crisis counseling, people who've lost their spouse, or older people who are lonely, and we go visit them and pray with them if they want, or just sit and listen to them talk, which is really interesting to listen to old people talk, as you can tell since I'm talking to you right now, and I'm old enough to be your mother. Okay, so anyway, I became a Stephen minister, and then across the street from my church is a hospital, and I started this thing I was involved with this program called No One Dies Alone. I thought there's a lot of people that come into that hospital that don't have family there. Either they're homeless or their family just can't get there yet. And so why should they be just alone in the room, even if they're unconscious? We can have somebody in there who can just be there, read scripture or talk. And so I did that, and I would go to the hospital and make my rounds, and sometimes I would sit with people who were unconscious, or there was this woman, she was so sweet, and they expected her to die any minute, but she didn't die, but she was unconscious. So I'm sitting there talking to God and saying, I don't know what to do. Should I just read something to her, or what should I do? And then all of a sudden, a song popped into my head, and it was, I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places. So I started singing that, and all of a sudden she opened her eyes, and she looked like past me, like she was looking at something, and it gave me a chill, and I thought, okay, that was the right thing to do. And so soon a guy came, he says, I want to sit with her. I can't remember her name now. Anyway, he says, I want to sit with her. And I said, I said, okay. So it was the middle of the night. So I left, and he came in and sat with her, and then she died. But then I would visit people who knew that they were dying and they were scared. And I would just visit and listen to them and give them communion if they wanted it. And also newborn babies. I had a prayer that a lot of people wanted a blessing, especially the Hispanic community, on their newborn babies. So I did that. But my last care receiver, I was with her for about 6 years. And I went to visit her every single week for 6 years. And she died right before the pandemic, right as the pandemic was starting. But I've always had this, I know people think I'm crazy, but I've always had this relationship with God ever since I can remember, since I was like 2 or something, before I was even taught. And I don't know how that happened, but I have sometimes a potty mouth. So I made a deal with God that I'll do good works and you will let me cuss. And he said, okay. I mean, sometimes it's like, sometimes when I'm talking to him, I'm thinking he's going, oh no, it's her again. And he sends somebody else to talk to me. But and I try not to ask for anything. One time I was really broke. And I mean, really broke. And I didn't have any jobs. And I didn't know what to do. And I'm sitting and talking to God, and I'm saying, okay, so what should I do? Should I sell the house? Because I've got a lot of equity in my house. Or should I go work for somebody else? What should I do? And my daughter walks in and she says, are you talking to God again and asking him for money? I said, no, I don't ask him for money. I ask him for guidance. She says, well, here. And she threw a residual on the bed for $20,000. That was from Lonesome Dove. Same thing happened a few years later. It was $8,000 from Lonesome Dove. Same thing happened to my daughter. She's driving home from the dentist with one of the kids, and the bill was going to be $2,500. We didn't have $2,500. She says, God, please, I need $2,500. She pulls in the driveway. We get the mail. There's a check in there for $2,500 from Blue Cross saying you've overpaid your premium for several years, and here's a check for $2,500. My husband used to say, he says, I don't get it. You need $500. You go talk to God. The next day, a check from out of nowhere comes for $499. True story. So anyway, I feel like I have a good relationship with God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and I talk to them all the time, and people think I'm crazy. I'll be sitting putting on my makeup, and my daughter will walk and say, who are you talking to? I said, God, who else? It's not that I pray a lot. I just talk.
Just a conversation.
Anyway, just a conversation. But you know what? I get answers. So that's why I don't tell people usually, because they think I'm crazy. But I'm telling you, it works.
All right, I'll tell my audience now that she's not crazy. She's just having a conversation with God. All right, so I want to come back around to your singing career. You mentioned that you had singing lessons, but you're also in the Academy of Country Music and the Western Music Association. Is singing one of your favorite things to do?
Yeah, it is. After my husband died, I was approached by a musician, a woman who was a wonderful guitar player, and she said, "Do you want to?" She had seen me sing in a little club. I joined this club called Songmakers, and it had some professional musicians in it. And I just needed something to do because I was grieving, basically. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just go sing again. Because I did sing on the Dean Martin show. And so I said, okay, but she introduced me to some fabulous musicians. J.D. Manis, who's a steel player who played for Vince Gill, Al Bruno, who played for Conway Twitty, and Dick Clark's Caravan of Stars, and Merle Haggard, and, all these great guys, and they would back me up. And so I had fantastic musicians. And this woman that was my music partner then, her name is Sandy Lane, she taught me how to do, stage, for like in concert halls. And one time we got a gig in Prescott, and we couldn't take our whole band, but they would give us pickup musicians in Prescott. So we went, and it was like the 4th of July or something. We were on a big, huge stage at the fairgrounds. Unbeknownst to us, there was a big lightning in the back of us. We have electric guitars and amps and everything. There's lightning back there, and I'm wearing this great duster that's blowing in the wind and everything. What we didn't know was that we could have been electrocuted. So anyway, we would do shows, and we got asked to do a show in, it was in Louisiana, Texas, and Kentucky, Tennessee. It was Tennessee. We went to Tennessee and did stuff, and they had a big thing for us and everything. So we made an album, and it had blues and classic country and some Cajun in it. So we got invited. It got radio play. It's real hard to get radio play when you're an independent. You don't, it's pay for play. And we were nobody, really. But anyway, it sold. And we were on different shows and different radio stations and stuff like that. So that was fun. And we were not young. I mean, I was in my 50s. And 60s. So I think we started in about 2001, because we made, and my dad, when my dad died, he was real proud. He said, "Oh, you sound like Julie London," which was his favorite singer. But anyway, so that was fun. It was a lot of fun. But it's also crazy because if I'm going to a rehearsal, I'm singing in the car, right? So I'm singing, and I pull up to a stoplight, and I turn around, and somebody's looking at me, like a guy's looking at me, and you roll down the window and say, "Oh, you look like you're a lot of fun. You want to go get some coffee?" "Oh, no, thanks." So I have to be really careful. I have to be really careful that I'm not singing or drumming in the car, or playing my guitar in the car or something like that. But anyway, I'm not a great guitar player. I was kind of a fake it till you make it guitar player, but it was fun anyway. It was a lot of fun. I made some money. I mean, I would make $600 for a gig, or $1,200 even sometimes, and all I had to do was sing. So it was great.
All right. So first you had people who thought you were crazy because you were talking to God, and now you got people who think you're crazy for singing to yourself.
Well, so one could deduce from that maybe, just maybe, I might have a screw loose or something. The thing is, I don't do anything unless it's fun, usually. I like to have fun, and I don't take myself all that seriously. Maybe that's why I haven't written a book. But, it's just, I just have a lot of fun. I have great friends. The singing kind of stopped during the pandemic because we couldn't go anywhere. And something has happened to my voice. You might not hear it because you don't know what I sounded like before, but it's more hoarse now than it was. And I don't know, I think I could still hold the notes, but I don't think I could hit the higher notes that I used to. So, and a lot of the musicians that I had, they were older and they've died or they've retired. And, guys that was their profession, and holding a big old heavy bass or guitar on stage for hours at a time, that's pretty hard on your body.
All right, I just have a couple of questions left.
Yeah.
You currently have a close working relationship with Robert Redford. What do you do for him? Okay.
He didn't know how to do social media. And about 2012, actually, believe it or not, he found me on Facebook. And I didn't believe that was him because, it could be, there's a lot of Redford imposters. So he had to convince me by telling me Tim's stories that it was him, because he had invited us to Thanksgiving, and, we knew him Tim knew him since Butch Cassidy, and I knew him since Electric Horseman. But anyway, he was getting ready to promote some films, and his son wanted him to get on Facebook and do it, reach out to fans. So he needed help with that. So I helped him with that. Plus, we started a private group for filmmakers, for young filmmakers and musicians and writers and artists and stuff. And it was a very small group. And we're still together, actually, by the way. So Redford and I found some connection that is so weird. It's almost like we're twins, or like yesterday. He said, I was just thinking of Richard Farnsworth, who was the wonderful actor I told you about. And I said, I was too last week. He just popped into my mind, and I started thinking about him, and I pulled a picture out and put it on my desk of Farnsworth. And Bob said, this is weird how we happen to be thinking about the same thing at the same time out of nowhere. And I said, I know. I said, somehow we're soulmates. Or he said, you are kind of my soulmate. He said, and my muse. So we just have a private place where we chat. We have a private chat place, and he sends me pictures. There are fans that stalk him, and I'm really good at research. So I try to find out who these people are, where they live, if they're dangerous, and what he should know about, or should he communicate with them or not. And then also I send pictures. He sends me a bunch of pictures that are autographed, and I know who wants pictures, and he'll send me, addresses, and send this to so-and-so and this to so-and-so and stuff. So I helped him with that, and we've just become really, really close. And in fact, when on the Thanksgiving thing, he had invited us to Thanksgiving, and my husband and I actually were separated, and he was separated from his wife too. But my husband and I were going to go to Park City anyway to see my mother. My husband and I were always friends first and married second. But anyway, he said, no. I said, no, what are you talking about? I want to go to Redford's. He says, what about your mother? I said, forget my mother. I said, I want to go to Redford's house. So we didn't. And then he laughed. It became a big joke. And just a few years ago, Redford said, you know why he didn't bring you, don't you? I said, no, I don't. He said, because you were so much like my first wife, and I was so heartbroken over our breakup that he was living somewhere else. He was afraid that you and I would get together, and then he wouldn't be able to come home if he wanted to. I said, oh, my God. And it's true. When my husband got sick, I made him come. We still were separated, but we still did things together. I made him come home, and I took care of him until he passed. So, and then it's like, oh, I have 15 minutes to find another husband, but I never did.
Your time hasn't expired yet. You still have time on the clock.
Yes, they've expired pretty much. Nobody wants a mean old woman,
You're not a mean old woman. You're a grandma. And that's our final topic of the day, talking about you being a grandmother. I know that's one of your favorite things to talk about. Tell me about your grandchildren and what it's like being a grandmother. But first of all, tell me what your grandma name is.
Grammy is my grandma name, Grammy. And I have 4 grandchildren. They're mixed. And being mixed, they're absolutely gorgeous, as you well know. And I'm telling you, they are the most talented. Now, of course, I sound like a grandma, right? But the truth is, the oldest one, who is now 20, he's an artist like I've never seen. And even Redford said, he said, oh, my God. He said, I would use him for storyboards or something, because he said he's just phenomenal. He's been drawing since he was 2. The second one is he can hear a piece of classical music on a piano and then play it just by hearing it, a complicated classical piece or a heavy hard metal on a guitar, and he can play it. He took up photography, and now bands he's only 18, bands want him to come and shoot their album covers, or car shows want him to come and shoot their cars. Then he can cook. He makes up all of these exotic Japanese style stuff. That's the second kid. He's just amazing. And then the third boy, he's also an artist, and he's real funny. He's just, but his art. And then my little Brooklyn, she's 13. She taught herself Japanese at the age of 11. She's now had high school Japanese. She can carry on a conversation. She's also an artist, and now she's making jewelry and selling them on Etsy, and she's 13. And they all live with me, and they take care of me, and they're very family oriented. Their dad is living in Oklahoma, so we don't see him much. So it's me, my daughter, and the 4 grandkids, and 2 hamsters. 2 guinea pigs, 1 hamster, 2 geckos, and 2 bulldogs. So it's a full house of critters and kids and 1 old woman and 1 middle-aged woman. But we have a lot of fun.
It sounds like it. So my guest this week has been singer, dancer, actress, court reporter, and grandma, Donna Leigh Scott. Miss Scott, thank you for being here and sharing your stories. It has been a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I was kind of nervous, but you make things so easy and welcoming. I really appreciate. Thank you so much, and I'm so glad that I finally got to meet you.
Ditto. This has been a pleasure.
As it were.
I've enjoyed your stories, and I'm sure you've got lots more stories to tell that I'd love to hear sometime.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another great storytelling journey. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
That was Stories from Real Life. Join us again next week for another great storytelling journey. See you next time.